The oxygen concentrator that Renee tossed into the dumpster held the only notarized copy of our partnership agreement. By the time this ended, I had voided her $640,000 sale, reopened the business as Flow of Deceit Oxygen, and put her to work sterilizing CPAP masks in a smock that says "Cut off my air." Every delivery ticket that prints now carries her federal fraud docket, itemized down to the penny. But the night I pulled that machine out of the trash, I was just a 56-year-old retired ICU nurse holding a $4,200 check and a warning from my dead brother. I spent 31 years in intensive care. I know what a dying breath sounds like, and I know what a forged signature looks like. At 56, I poured $141,000 of my pension into a home oxygen and CPAP equipment service with my sister-in-law Renee. We notarized a 50-50 partnership. I insisted on one non-negotiable term: free oxygen for the seniors at my church, no co-pays, no Medicare clawbacks, no prior authorizations used as a stall tactic. Renee had always been the golden child in the family, the one my mother bragged about at church suppers, the one who could talk a used car salesman into financing a casserole. My brother Daniel, Renee's husband, was the quiet architect of the whole arrangement. He had told me more than once to keep the original agreement somewhere Renee would never think to look. He worked 18 years as a field service tech for a medical gas company, so he knew every bolt and fitting on a concentrator. He was also the one who taught me that a machine is only as good as its filter, and that trust is only as good as the paper it is printed on. That one detail saved my life. Daniel died 8 months before I found the check. He was 61. He had been on a CPAP machine for years, and he used to joke that our oxygen business was the only thing keeping him honest about his own lungs. The call came at 6 in the morning from the county hospital: massive pulmonary embolism. He was gone before the ambulance got there. I worked the code in my head for weeks, the way nurses do, replaying the word pulmonary, the word saddle embolism, the fact that he had complained about leg pain after a long drive, and I told him to elevate it and take an aspirin. I did not know then that his death would open a door under my feet. The funeral was at our family church, the same one where the seniors sat in the front 2 pews with their oxygen tubing snaking under the hymnals. Renee stood at the door like she was receiving guests at a country club. She had a leather folio under one arm and a pen behind her ear, which I told myself was just her way of keeping busy. Brad spent the entire service in the vestibule on his phone, pacing with one finger pressed to his other ear. At the graveside, Renee handed me a card for an estate attorney and said we should talk soon about the business, not about Daniel. That was the first time I felt the ground shift. The morning after his funeral, Renee and Brad pulled into my driveway in a leased black Escalade with temporary plates. Renee wore a black shift dress and carried a clipboard, which should have been my first clue. Brad was on his phone before he even got out of the truck, talking about aggregating the DME contracts. He wore a golf shirt with a medical supply company logo I had never seen. They said they were there to help me manage the business. Manage, not mourn. Daniel was not in the ground 12 hours before Renee asked me to sign a limited power of attorney so she could handle the Medicare revalidation. I told her I needed time. She smiled and said, "Of course, sweetie, take all the time you need." Then Brad started asking about the safe in Daniel's garage, the one where Daniel kept his torque wrenches and his old field service manuals. I told him I did not have a key. That was true. I did not tell him I knew Daniel never kept anything valuable in that safe. He kept his real secrets in machines. He had shown me the hollow concentrator years earlier, during a Saturday afternoon in his garage, after I asked why the intake filter on that demo unit sat higher than normal. He tapped the side panel with a screwdriver and whispered, "If you ever need to find something I don't want Renee to know about, look inside the false floor." I thought he was joking. He was not. 3 months later, a regional respiratory chain out of Ohio offered $640,000 for our Medicare contracts, the equipment, and the patient list. I said I wanted to review the terms, especially the assignment of the Medicare supplier number and the assumption of the surety bond. Renee said she would handle the due diligence. She used phrases like purchase price allocation and goodwill valuation, words I had heard only in continuing education seminars. 2 weeks after that, I came home to a priority mail envelope. Inside was a check for $4,200, with the memo line written in Renee's loopy hand, cannula. There was also a dissolution of partnership document, notarized, with my signature on page 4. I had not signed it. The signature had the right slant, but the loop on my letter Y was too tight. I know my own signature. I also know what a photocopied and pasted forgery looks like, because I used to review death certificates in the ICU and catch the ones that had been altered before they went to the county coroner. The notary stamp was from a woman named Darlene something, and the date was 2 weeks after Daniel's funeral, a Tuesday when I was at the pulmonologist getting my own lungs checked because I had been coughing from the mold in my garage. I had not signed a dissolution. I had been in a paper gown on an exam table. Within a day, Renee and Brad arrived to walk me through the transition. Brad said the business valuation had been net of liabilities, which meant they had subtracted the loan from the sale price, but I had not known about any loan. Renee said the buyer did not want the used inventory, even though a 5-year-old oxygen concentrator with low hours is still worth $800 on the secondary market. While Brad lectured me, I looked past him through the kitchen window. At the curb, next to the trash cans, sat a blue Invacare Perfecto 2 concentrator with a fluorescent green bulk pickup sticker on it. I asked Renee why she had thrown it out. She said, and I remember this exactly, "That old thing is junk. The buyer did not want the used inventory. Stop worrying about trash, sweetie." She said sweetie the way a nurse says honey to a patient with dementia. That night I waited until well past midnight, after the streetlights switched to their amber setting and the neighbor's motion sensor finally stopped clicking. I put on gloves, not because I thought it was evidence yet, but because I had spent 31 years handling equipment that carried bacteria and oxygen tubing that grew biofilm. I rolled the concentrator up the driveway and into my garage. The serial number on the back matched the demo unit Daniel had modified for physician marketing. The side panel was already loose. I removed the 6 Phillips head screws from the lower compressor housing. Inside, where the intake filter should have been, there was a hollowed-out section lined with closed cell foam. Daniel had built it years earlier to show doctors the internal flow path and pressure drop across the sieve beds. Only he and I knew about the false floor. I reached into the foam and pulled out a rolled manila envelope. Inside was the original partnership agreement, notarized, both signatures, the church senior's clause on page 2. On the last page, in Daniel's cramped block capitals, was a note. It said, "Do not trust Renee or Brad. Save yourself. The agreement is the only thing that can void the sale." Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family can be the most dangerous unsecured liability on your balance sheet. Renee and Brad did not waste a day. They showed up the next morning with a manila folder and a notary, a woman in a starched blouse who looked like she did loan signings for cash. Renee said, "We are just taking care of you, sweetie. The sale is done. You need to sign this release so we can distribute the remaining assets." The release said I accepted the $4,200 as full and final payment for my share of the partnership. Full and final. They had already sold the Medicare contracts and equipment for $640,000. My share should have been $320,000. They were offering me 1.3% and acting like they were doing me a favor. I did not scream. I did not argue. I let my eyes go a little glassy, the way I had seen family members do when the doctor said brain death. I said, "I am so tired, Renee. Daniel just died. I cannot read all this." I let my hands shake when I picked up the pen. I even fumbled the cap and dropped it on the floor. Then I put the pen down and said I might need to ask my pastor or maybe a lawyer. Renee's jaw tightened, but she smiled. Brad told me not to worry. They would set up an appointment with their estate attorney who could explain everything. The notary packed up her stamp and left without making eye contact. I noticed she did not check my identification, which is a violation of notary law in our state. I did not say that either. Over the next week, they came back 3 more times. The first time it was a tax form, a short stack of pages with a schedule of debts that I knew was wrong because it listed a storage unit in Columbus I had never rented. The second time it was a consent to release medical records, which made no sense for a partnership distribution, and then a document called a spousal waiver even though I had never been married. Each time I played the same part. I squinted at the pages. I asked them to read the big words. I mentioned my pastor, my neighbor, my grief counselor. Each time Renee smiled and Brad sighed, and each time they left with their unsigned papers and their patience thinning. By Thursday, Brad's voice had an edge. By Saturday, Renee stopped saying sweetie and started saying Loretta. We really need to finalize this. By the end of the week, they had convinced me to move into their house while I recovered. They said my house had a broken sump pump and black mold in the crawl space. I knew that was a lie because I had replaced the sump pump myself 2 years earlier and had the basement tested after a flood, but I did not say anything. I packed one suitcase, kept the concentrator and the agreement in a locked toolbox in my trunk, and let them drive me to their 5-bedroom house with the golf course view. The house had a 3-car garage, a kitchen island the size of a hospital bed, and a security system with cameras in every hallway. Renee said it was for my safety. I understood it was for my compliance. Inside their house, I became the compliant, confused widow. I moved slowly. I called Brad by the wrong name twice, once Bert and once Brent. I asked Renee to repeat simple things like how to work the shower. I told them I had not slept in weeks, which was actually true. I let them think I was fogged from grief. The truth was I was running through the options like a triage nurse. I had to find the forged dissolution and the original sale contract. I had to see how deep the fraud went, and I had to do it before they found a way to get my genuine signature on something irreversible. Living in Renee's house was like being a patient on a long-term unit. Everyone wanted me sedated, compliant, and forgetful. I played the part while I watched. Brad took calls at 6 in the morning and 11 at night. He used phrases like the asset purchase agreement has a clawback clause, and the Medicare administrative contractor is asking for the original chain of title. Sometimes he would hang up, say something like idiots, and then buy another $4,000 guitar online. One night I saw him order a $5,000 Les Paul from a vintage dealer on Reverb, then tell Renee the business needed new laptops. Renee dodged calls from a number in Ohio. She would look at the screen, mouth buyer's lawyer, and let it go to voicemail. Then she would order a $300 charcuterie board for 2 people and leave half of it to mold in the fridge. I counted 3 boards in 2 weeks. The mold on the brie was a different color each time. The money was everywhere and nowhere. I found a water-damaged credit card statement in the kitchen recycling bin. It showed a cash advance of $38,000 taken the week after Daniel died. The same week, Renee had told me she could not afford the headstone engraving. I said nothing. I just folded the statement and put it in my bra. A week later, I found a receipt from a boat dealership for a down payment on a pontoon boat that had never been delivered, and a dry cleaning tag for $900 worth of linen. I also found a pawn slip for one of Daniel's watches. That slip made my chest tighten, because I had given him that watch for his 50th birthday. Renee was spending like the business was still earning, but the business had been sold. The math did not work. I had spent decades reading Medicare remittance advice and insurance explanation of benefits forms, so I could read a financial statement the way other people read a magazine. The numbers told me they were bleeding cash and hiding the exit. The contrast came early. One afternoon, the garbage disposal jammed. Brad stood over the sink with a butter knife, saying he needed to call a plumber and maybe an electrician because the breaker had tripped. I went to the basement, reset the breaker, came back, reached under the sink, found the hex key in the little rubber holder, turned the disposal's motor shaft counterclockwise until the obstruction broke free and pressed the reset button. The disposal roared to life. It took maybe 2 minutes. Brad stared at me. I said, 31 years in intensive care teaches you to fix small problems before they become codes. He laughed, but not in a nice way. That was the moment I knew they had underestimated me completely. The next week, the toilet in the guest bathroom kept running. Renee called a plumber and paid him $200 to replace a $9 flapper. I stayed quiet. The week after that, the ice maker stopped making ice. Brad pulled the whole unit out and left it in the middle of the kitchen floor. I waited until he went to the gym, then slid it back, found the plastic water line frozen behind the crisper drawer, thawed it with a hair dryer, and restarted the fill cycle. It made ice in 20 minutes. Brad came home and said the repairman must have fixed it. Renee said I should not be lifting heavy things. I said I had lifted patients for 3 decades, so an ice maker was nothing. The truth was I used those small chores to map the house. I learned where the breaker box was, where the water shutoff was, where Brad kept his spare keys, and where the security system blind spots were. The camera in the hallway above the office did not reach the floor. I replaced a smoke detector battery without asking, and when Renee asked why the chirping stopped, I told her I had unplugged it. She believed me. She believed everything about my hands being soft and my mind being slow. I started taking out the trash every night. Renee thought it was a sign of my decline, a widow needing routine. The bin behind the garage was overflowing with white kitchen bags. Some were not kitchen trash. One bag was full of shredded paper. I pulled out a handful of strips. Most were numbers. One strip read personal guarantee. Another read loan agreement. A third read Clear Air Holdings. I started taking one bag at a time to my guest room, locking the door, and sorting the shred on the carpet. It was like piecing together a puzzle made of confetti. I used a nurse's habit, always charting what I saw. I taped strips to a piece of cardboard with transparent tape, matching torn edges and font sizes. I worked in half-hour increments, usually between 2 and 2:30 in the morning when the house was quiet. I used tweezers from the guest bathroom and a lint roller to pick up the tiny confetti bits. By the fourth night, I had taped together the top half of a loan agreement and most of a personal guarantee page. The word collateral appeared 12 times. My social security number appeared once, printed, not signed. That was enough to make my hands shake. I reconstructed enough to know 3 things. There was a loan for $212,000 secured by the equipment. There was a shell company called Clear Air Holdings, and there was a folder in Brad's office with my name on it. The office door was locked. I had expected that. Before nursing school, I spent 2 summers working for my uncle's lock and key shop in Flint, Michigan. I learned to rekey deadbolts, install panic bars, and open car doors for people who locked their keys inside. I still carried a small kit in my makeup bag because old habits die hard. The office door had a quick-set deadbolt, nothing special. At 2 in the morning, I went downstairs in socks. I inserted a tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway and applied light torque. I used a short hook pick and raked the pins 3 times. The plug turned on the 3rd pass. The deadbolt slid back with a click that sounded louder than it was. I waited 10 seconds, listening for movement. The house stayed quiet except for Brad's snore from the master suite and the faint hum of the whole house audio system. The office smelled like toner and leather. There was a desk lamp with a green shade, a monitor, and a filing cabinet with a wafer lock. I used the same hook and a small jiggler and popped it in about 20 seconds. I know how that sounds, but a cheap filing cabinet lock is not security. It is decoration. The drawer slid open. The first folder was labeled Tranche 2. The second was labeled with my own name. I sat on the floor with my phone flashlight and read page by page. The Tranche 2 folder held the real sale documents. The buyer, a regional respiratory chain out of Akron, had agreed to pay $640,000 for our Medicare contracts, the equipment, and the patient list. The escrow instructions showed the money split 3 ways. One wire went to Renee's personal account at a bank in North Carolina. One went to Brad's account at a credit union. The third, $180,000, went to Clear Air Holdings, LLC, a shell company registered in Nevada with Brad as the registered agent. There was also a wire instruction for a bank in Belize, account number ending 1904. My $4,200 check was listed as a cannula distribution. They had literally paid me the cost of a nasal cannula. The folder with my name was worse. Inside was a loan agreement from a private lender in Ohio. It was for $212,000, secured by the same equipment that had been sold. My signature was on the personal guarantee. I had never seen it. The social security number was mine. The loan funded 2 weeks after Daniel died. The default clause stated that if the collateral was sold without lender consent, the full balance became due immediately. Renee and Brad had stopped making payments the month before. The lender's service address was the same Akron buyer's lawyer. I sat there in the dark and understood the full shape of the trap. They had sold the equipment, pocketed the money, and set me up as the borrower on a loan secured by collateral that no longer existed. The lender would come after me. I was the balloon payment. I also found a second folder buried behind the first. It held a CMS 855's Medicare enrollment application with my name listed as the owner and sole guarantor. The application had been submitted a month after Daniel died. It requested a change of ownership to a new entity called Clear Air Holdings. The supporting documents included a forged copy of my driver's license and a letter from a bank I had never used, confirming a $250,000 line of credit. The letter was printed on a real bank's letterhead, but the account number did not match any account I had ever held. That was the moment I knew they were not just stealing the sale. They were preparing to bill Medicare under my identity, and if the scheme collapsed, the recovery audit contractor would come after me personally. I was not just a victim. I was the designated fall guy. I photographed every page with my phone, using the HDR setting to capture the watermarks and the notary stamp. I was careful to replace everything exactly as I found it, down to the orientation of the paperclips. Then I relocked the filing cabinet and the office door. I went upstairs and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Daniel's note was right. The partnership agreement was the only thing that could void the sale, because it proved the dissolution was forged, and Renee had no authority to transfer the assets without my consent. But I needed more than photographs. I needed a live person on the record, and I needed to trigger the dead man's switch that Daniel had built into the partnership. The next day, I bought a prepaid phone at a gas station and called the bank where the partnership kept its operating account. I asked for the senior compliance officer. A woman named Miriam Voss came on the line. I said my name and told her I had the original partnership agreement and proof of a forged dissolution. There was a long pause. Then she said, "I have been waiting for your call. Your brother left a standing instruction with our BSA compliance office. Any sale proceeds over $100,000 from the partnership account require your physical presence and the original notarized agreement. Without you, the wire is frozen." Miriam told me the buyer's $640,000 wire was sitting in a suspense account, flagged for pending fraud review. The bank had already filed a suspicious activity report with Finn's CEN on Clear Air Holdings for structuring. She said, "I need you to bring me the original agreement and every document you photographed." "Can you do it safely?" I told her I could. She said she would contact the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General and the local U.S. Attorney's Office. She told me to sit tight and not sign anything. I almost laughed. I had been not signing things for weeks. We arranged to meet at a public library branch across town, in a study room on the second floor. I wore a ball cap and carried the original agreement in my purse inside a folded newspaper. Miriam was already there with a laptop and a scanner. She copied the agreement, photographed my driver's license, and had me sign a statement of authenticity in front of the library notary. Then she showed me a copy of Daniel's standing instruction. The first line read, "If my sister Loretta ever calls regarding the partnership, freeze all account activity and contact her at this number." The second line read, "She is the only one in this family who ever paid attention to the saturation levels." I cried in that little study room, but I kept my voice flat. Miriam told me the freeze had already gone into effect the moment the wire hit the suspense account. The buyer's closing agent had been demanding release for weeks. Renee and Brad did not know the freeze was permanent unless I appeared with the original and signed a live acknowledgement. Daniel had built the dead man's switch years earlier. He had walked into the bank with a signed, notarized instruction. It said that if anything happened to him, no sale or transfer of partnership assets could complete unless I personally appeared with the original agreement and signed a live acknowledgement. Renee and Brad had no idea. They thought they could forge documents and walk away. They could not access a single dollar without my face, my voice, and my original signature. I was the living collateral. Miriam also asked me to keep gathering anything that showed intent to hide assets. She gave me a secure email address for the HHS OIG special agent. I did not carry a weapon. I carried a prepaid phone, a makeup bag full of lock picks, and 11 years of charting discipline. Before the final play, I needed to know if there was one human thread left to pull, so I staged a collapse. I had spent 31 years watching real cardiac arrests, so I knew the physicality. I waited until Brad was on a call with the buyer's lawyer and Renee was at the kitchen island with the sale documents. I gripped the counter, let my knees buckle, and slid to the floor. I made a half sound, a kind of gurgling wheeze, and grabbed at my left arm. My head hit the cabinet. I lay still. The room was quiet for maybe 4 seconds. Then Brad glanced over, phone still to his ear. He said, "I am going to have to call you back." He set the phone down, and for 1 second I thought he was coming to help. Instead, he walked past me, stepped over my legs, and picked up the escrow instruction that had slid off the counter. He said, "Get up, Loretta. The buyer's lawyer is going to fax over the closing statement, and I need your signature." Then he stepped back over me and left the room. Renee came around the corner. She looked at me on the floor. She said, "Do you need water?" I did not answer. She waited maybe 3 seconds, then turned to the sink and filled her own glass. She stepped over my outstretched hand and went to the office. From the floor, I heard her say, "She is fine." She always had a flair for drama. Then she called to Brad, "Did you send the signed escrow letter?" I lay there until they were both gone, and I let the last warm feeling I had for my sister-in-law go cold. That was the point of no return. After that, I was not trying to save family. I was trying to win. I counted to 100 before I moved. My left hip ached where I had hit the tile, but nothing was broken. I sat up, drank a glass of water from the tap, and went upstairs to prepare the final play. 2 days later, the bank called Renee. She put the phone on speaker, pacing the kitchen. The buyer's wire had been frozen. The compliance officer needed both partners present with the original agreement to release the funds. Renee told the bank she had the original in her files. Miriam asked her to bring it. Renee hung up and started throwing things. A glass water pitcher hit the backsplash and shattered. Brad said they would fix it. That night, they told me I had to come to the bank the next morning. They said it was a small formality. They said the buyer's money was waiting and I needed to sign one more paper for taxes. They did not know I had the original agreement in my locked toolbox. They did not know I had already given Miriam everything. I slept maybe 2 hours. At 7, Renee came into my room without knocking and laid a navy dress on the foot of my bed. She said, "Wear this. You need to look respectable." I wore my own gray cardigan instead. Brad drove. Renee sat in the back seat with me and kept saying, "This is the last step. You sign, we all walk away." I counted the telephone poles and said nothing. At 10 the next morning, we walked into Pinnacle Trust. Renee wore white linen. Brad wore a golf polo and talked about the closing as if it were already done. The branch manager put us in a conference room with a long table, a pitcher of water, and a speakerphone in the center. Renee sat across from me and slid a document across the table. It was titled Affidavit of Lost Partnership Agreement and Indemnification. It said I had lost the original, that the dissolution was valid, and that I released all claims and held the bank and buyer harmless. Brad pushed a pen toward me. He said, "Just sign here, Loretta. It is the only way to get our money." I looked at the document. The affidavit had a section where I was supposed to swear under penalty of perjury that the original agreement had been destroyed in a household accident. The indemnification clause said I would personally cover any legal fees if the missing agreement ever surfaced. It was a trap inside a trap. I did not pick up the pen. I said, "No, I will not sign away my oxygen." Renee's smile fell. Brad said, "Sign the damn paper." I stood up. I said, "I spent 31 years keeping people from suffocating. You sold my equipment, forged my signature, and set me up to die under a loan. I am not signing anything." Then I reached into my bag and set the original partnership agreement on the table. "This is not lost." Renee's hand shot across the table, but I was faster. I pulled the agreement back and held it against my chest. Brad half stood, and that was when the door opened. Miriam Voss stepped in with 2 agents from the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General and a uniformed police officer. She said, "The escrow is frozen and this document voids the sale." The agent stepped forward. Renee started talking, fast and high, saying it was all a misunderstanding, saying I was confused from grief. Brad stood up and almost tripped over his chair. The police officer told him to sit down. I remember thinking that for the first time in months, the air in my lungs felt clean. The original agreement triggered everything. The bank's wire desk placed a 90-day freeze on the Renee, Brad, and Clear Air accounts, pending a full fraud review. The buyer's lawyer sent a termination letter by 2 that afternoon. The private lender voided the forged loan after the document examiner confirmed my signature had been cut and pasted from a lease. By the end of the month, Renee and Brad were charged with wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, forgery, and elder financial abuse. The house with the golf course view, the Escalades, the guitars, and the shell company accounts were seized. Renee took a plea. Brad held out for trial and lost. She got 5 years, he got 7. The judge ordered restitution. I did not get a windfall. I got my business back, free of debt, with the equipment and Medicare contracts returned. The Medicare supplier number was reinstated after a full audit, which took 6 months. I had to resubmit every piece of documentation to the National Supplier Clearinghouse, including proof of bonding, proof of liability insurance, and assigned at a station that I would maintain the church seniors' free oxygen program. The respiratory chain that tried to buy us out dropped its claim within a week and returned the patient list. I spent another month calling every one of those seniors personally, telling them their oxygen would keep coming and they did not owe a cent. Most of them cried. So did I. I renamed the company Flow of Deceit Oxygen because that was what Renee sold me. The church seniors still get free oxygen. I run the books myself now, and I kept the original concentrator on a shelf in my office as a reminder. As part of her supervised release, Renee has to complete 2,000 hours of community service. The judge approved my request to have her serve it in my sterilization room, so now she wears a smock that says "cut off my air." She sanitizes CPAP masks and tubing 8 hours a day. Every delivery ticket prints her federal fraud docket number instead of a slogan. I watch her through the glass sometimes. She does not look up. Last month, a new patient asked me why the ticket had a case number on it. I told her it was a reminder that every breath is a gift and some people will charge you for the mask. She said amen. I said amen back. Daniel had known. He had built the hollow concentrator, had told the bank to wait for my voice, had written the warning. He did not leave me a fortune. He left me the means to prove the truth. Family is not a blood right. It is a trust account. Once someone empties it, you stop making deposits. The people who love you will hand you oxygen. The people who use you will bill you for the mask. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If you believe family can be the most dangerous unsecured liability on your balance sheet, hit like and subscribe. Until next time, keep your oxygen close and your signature closer.